Hey everyone, we finally made it to the last lesson of Unit 1, Part 1, and we are going to end it with something that may seem kind of familiar to you, the midpoint formula. So we are starting today on page 56 of your Springboard books. You're definitely going to want a pencil, possibly a highlighter, and for sure a calculator, okay? So the midpoint, we've talked a lot about before already, and it's a point on a segment that divides it into two congruent segments. Now, if we look at the picture here, we have a bunch of segments, and just visually speaking, especially since they're already graphed for us, we could plot on here pretty precisely even, but it definitely just like kind of visually a good estimate of where the midpoints of each of these segments lie. Now, we can also look at this then to look if there's a pattern that could help us officially determine the midpoint. So if we look at segment AB, point A here is at 2 comma 2, and then point B is at 2 comma 6. For segment CD, C is up here at 5 comma 7, and D is at 11, excuse me, number off a little bit, 11, 7. And over here we have E and we have F. E is at, I'm scrolling a little too much. E is at 4 comma 1. F is at 6 comma 5. And we have finally G and H, which are at 8, 4 and 14, 0, right? We have X comma Y. Now notice our approximate midpoints here, right? If we look here, we have the midpoint of AB was at 2, 4. That midpoint of EF is at 5. Oh, sorry. CD, sorry, I'm looking up here, is at 8, 7. And then we have the midpoint of EF is at 5, 3. And last but not least, the midpoint here is at 11, 2 of GH. Now, we're going to look, is there a relationship between what happens with the X values and then what happens with the Y values for each of these? Well, hopefully you start noticing between these is that, especially in these last couple of examples, the 4 and 6, the number in the middle of that is 5. 1 and 5, the number in the middle of that is 3. 8 and 14, the number in the middle of that is 11. 4 and 0, the number in the middle of that is 2. So each time we are looking for the average of our X values, our X coordinates, and same thing with the Y values. We keep looking for the average of our Y coordinates. So what we see is that there's a pattern that we're looking for that number in the middle of them. AKA, in order to find the midpoint each time, we need to take the two X values, add them up, and divide by 2, and take our two Y values, add them up, and divide by 2. Now, sometimes you're going to see it written as x1, y1 plus x2, y2. Order is really not necessarily important here because we're adding. It's not like the distance formula where order is going to be as important. What matters is that you're adding your two x values together and you're adding your two y values together. And the other important thing is that you add the values up, then divide by 2, add the values up, then divide by 2. Again, your answer is going to be a point. So x comma y, okay? So using our formula to test this out, if we look at number 4, we're looking for the midpoint of AC, where A is at 1, 4, and C is at 11, 10. So we're going to start, we're going to take our two X values, add them up, divide by 2, and then we'll also take our two Y values, add them up, and divide by 2. Okay. Now again, make sure you add them up first and then divide by 2. So 1 plus 11 is 12 divided by 2. And then 4 plus 10 is 14. So we're adding those first, then we're dividing by 2. So we end up with 6, comma 7 in order to find our midpoint. And basically what we can also conclude from that, if M is that midpoint of segment AC, we know that AM is congruent to MC, right? So bringing it back to the definition of midpoint. Now, number 5 is basically saying then, is it reasonable? How could we check our answer here? Well, very similar to what we did on the last page, a way to double check if things are reasonable. If you have the ability to graph it and look at the picture and say, okay, does the midpoint make sense? Did it make sense that 5 comma 2, or excuse me, 5 comma 3 was our midpoint? Yeah, for segment EF it did. So if we had the ability to, if we had a graph, we could possibly graph these and make sure, does our answer make sense? Okay, you don't have to, but it is a way to make sure that do these seem reliable or not. Okay. The last question then that we are going to do is number 7. And 7 is a fun example because what they're doing in number 7 is they're telling us we have a segment named ST. And they're telling us that we have a midpoint M, right? Here's our midpoint M on this number line. And they're telling us that point S has coordinates at 1 comma 2. And they're also telling us that this midpoint has coordinates at 3 comma 6. So what they want us to actually do is find the coordinates of point T. So we have the midpoint this time and we want to find the other end. So you could do algebra here, but I actually think it's a little bit easier to think about this problem with our picture, right? Because how much did we have to move to get from 1 to 3? Well, we had to go to the right 2 units, up 2, right? So if that's in the middle, then we would also have to add 2 to get to our value at point T. And then the same idea is going to kind of occur from here. How did I get from this y value to this y value? Well, I went up 4, added 4. So that's exactly, again, if this is directly in the middle, what I'd have to do on this side, I'd have to add 4. Okay, so our final answer here, T is at 5 comma 10. All right, that's the midpoint, and you have finally made it to the end of the first part of our first unit. Have a great day.